Day 1 of rain is nothing. You wait it out. Day 3, you start rationing what's left in camp. 9 days in, the ground outside has gone to soup, and by day 14, you've stopped counting, because counting doesn't help anymore. 2 straight weeks of rain wasn't a bad stretch of weather for ancient humans. It was closer to a siege, except the enemy was the sky, and there was no negotiating with it. We treat rain like background noise now, something to nap through, something Netflix pairs well with. 50,000 years ago, that same sound falling on the same kind of night carried 3 separate ways to kill you, and none of them needed 2 weeks to finish the job. Cold was the fastest. Wet skin sheds heat up to 25 times quicker than dry skin. And without waterproof shelter or real clothing, a body could slide into hypothermia in a matter of hours once temperatures dropped below 50°F, a threshold most nights crossed even in parts of Africa during the wet season at higher elevation. Flooding worked slower, but hit harder. Ancient shelters clustered near rivers and hillsides, so sustained downpours didn't just get everything wet, they sent walls of water straight into occupied caves. Archaeologists have pulled thick flood sediment layers out of cave floors, clear evidence people were living there when the water came through, and in several of those caves. Nobody ever moved back in. Then there were the predators, and this is the part that should unsettle you. Rain pushes animals toward shelter exactly the way it pushes humans, and sometimes shelter meant the same cave. Sites in South Africa have turned up human and big cat remains stacked in identical layers, some human skulls carrying puncture wounds that match a leopard's bite with disturbing precision. That kind of storm didn't just soak the world. It crushed predator, prey, and human into the exact same square footage, at the exact same time, for 2 straight weeks. Inside that crowded, soaked world, one task mattered above every other: don't let the fire die. Here's the part that made it genuinely terrifying. Before roughly 40,000 years ago, we're not fully certain how consistently humans could produce fire from nothing at all. Controlled fire use stretches back at least 400,000 years at Kesem Cave in Israel, possibly close to 1 million years at Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Keeping a flame alive and creating a new one from scratch, though, are 2 entirely different skill sets, and for most of prehistory, most people could reliably manage only the first. Lose the flame, and you might not get it back. That's why groups transported embers instead of risking it smoldering coals wrapped in green leaves or packed inside tinder fungus, a growth capable of holding a spark and smoldering quietly for hours. Essentially, a biological lighter carried like insurance. We know this wasn't guesswork either. Titsi the Iceman, the 5,300-year-old body pulled from the Alps, was found with a complete fire kit tucked into his belt pouch: tinder fungus, flint, iron pyrite for sparking, extra tinder as backup. 5,000 years later, and losing fire was still serious enough to justify dedicated gear against it. This length of storm would have made fire the single non-negotiable priority above shelter, above food, above everything. Push it deeper into the cave. Block the wind with hide or brush. Feed it in small, careful amounts. Hunt for dead lower branches on conifer trees, still dry beneath the canopy overhead. Split waterlogged logs open to reach the dry core inside. Strip birch bark for kindling, since birch contains betulin, a compound that keeps burning even when soaked. For 2 full weeks, someone's entire role might have been sitting beside that flame, feeding it, guarding it, refusing to let it go dark, because that fire wasn't just heat. It was every meal, every ounce of safety, and the only light the group would see until the weather finally broke. Fire secured, body dry, nowhere to go, so what fills 14 days like that? You build. The archaeological record makes this unmistakable. Rock shelters are packed with manufacturing evidence, stone tools frozen at every stage of production, and tight clusters of flaking debris, the tiny stone fragments that fly off, while shaping a blade concentrated in exactly the spots where someone would have sat near firelight for hours on end. Stone wasn't the only thing being worked. Blombo's cave in South Africa yielded a 100,000-year-old pigment workshop, abalone shells serving as mixing bowls, ochre ground down to powder, bone tools shaped for stirring and application. Not scattered survival behavior, a system run deliberately, likely while rain hammered the entrance outside. Bone needles tell a parallel story, showing up around 61,000 years ago in South Africa before spreading through Europe and Asia. Fine, deliberate objects with hand-drilled eyes so small nobody could rush them. You make a needle like that seated, focused, with hours to spare, and a stretch of weather like this handed people exactly that kind of time. At Abri-du-Mar in France, a Neanderthal site, researchers recovered twisted plant fiber cordage dated to roughly 52,000 years old, the oldest confirmed string ever discovered. In Hohlefels Cave, Germany, they uncovered something stranger still, a 35,000-year-old ivory tool, drilled with 4 holes and cut with spiral grooves, engineered specifically to twist plant fiber into rope. Somebody sat down mid-storm and built a rope-making machine. Cordage work is slow, repetitive, and forgiving of interruption, the ideal task for 2 weeks trapped indoors, and rope reshaped nearly everything downstream. Shelters, tool handles, snares, traps, an enormous share of ancient technology runs through a length of string. And string almost certainly began with someone waiting out weather exactly like this. Comfort mattered too. Sibutu Cave in South Africa preserved 77,000-year-old bedding, layered sedge, rush, and grass built into sleeping mats, topped with Cape laurel leaves chosen for their natural insect-repelling properties, periodically burned and rebuilt to stay clean. Pest control existed tens of thousands of years before the concept had a name. Then, the story bends somewhere nobody expects. The art. Chauvet Cave in southern France holds paintings roughly 36,000-years-old lions, horses, rhinos, bears, rendered with anatomical precision that still stops researchers cold, several animals caught mid-stride with muscle and motion worked into the line work. This isn't idle sketching. It's the output of people who studied these animals obsessively and rebuilt them from memory, underground by lamplight. Lascaux, Altamira, and Sulawesi's cave art dated to at least 45,000 years. The oldest known figurative art on Earth follow the identical pattern. These images sit deep past narrow crawl through passages, nowhere near an entrance you'd shelter beside. Someone carried a fat-fueled lamp into total darkness to paint there. Nobody does that with clear skies and good hunting outside. You do that on day 11 or 12 of rain, once every tool's already sharpened and there's nothing left but the dark and the impulse to make something inside it. We can't prove cave art was strictly a storm-bound habit, but the overlap is hard to dismiss. Prehistory's biggest creative surge kept surfacing in exactly the places people were stuck longest. Which points toward something bigger. This kind of weather may not have just produced art. It may have produced culture itself. Picture 15 to 30 people packed into one shelter for 2 straight weeks, with nowhere else to be. They talk. They listen. Information moves. In 2014, anthropologist Polly Wiesner published a study comparing daytime and nighttime conversation among the Jew/Hoansi in the Kalahari Desert. Daytime talk stayed transactional: land, resources, disputes, after dark, around the fire. Over 80% of conversation shifted toward story, song, and ritual. Firelight itself seemed to change the subject matter, lowering tension and loosening people up. The fire wasn't only warmth, it functioned as the earliest social network on record, and what circulated there wasn't idle talk. It was survival data. Where water holds through dry months, which plants are safe, where good flint sits, how to track a specific animal. Knowledge, transferring mind to mind through nothing but speech, not gossip. Survival, beyond the practical, something else took root: myth, explanation, story. Every culture on record carries rain mythology. And someone had to invent the first version, almost certainly while sitting through the very storm the story was built to explain. One case shows exactly how far that storytelling power reached. The oldest oral traditions ever verified against real geological events are Aboriginal Australian accounts of sea level rise from roughly 7,000 years ago, stories that survived 7 millennia through nothing but repetition. That kind of durability doesn't happen by accident. It takes groups spending enormous stretches of time doing precisely that, sitting together, retelling the same story until it locks into permanent memory. That stretch of weather wasn't wasted time. It was transfer time, the window where knowledge passed from old to young, and skill moved through demonstration instead of instruction. And rain wasn't purely a threat. Sometimes it worked in your favor. After heavy rain, softened ground holds the clearest tracks anywhere: deep, sharp, easy to read. It meant stored water too. Depressions found near nearly every known prehistoric site show signs. Some were deliberately deepened to hold more of it. Mushrooms surged. Tubers loosened in soaked soil. Insects surfaced. Termites swarmed across tropical Africa after storms, delivering one of the densest protein sources available with zero tools required a behavior chimpanzees still repeat today, and one early humans almost certainly exploited at a far larger scale. So what did ancient humans actually do across 14 days of unbroken rain? Everything that mattered. They kept the fire from dying. They built the tools the next hunt would need. They stitched clothing for the cold still coming. They twisted the rope holding their shelters together. They ground the pigment that would later cover cave walls. They told the stories that carried survival knowledge forward another generation. And when the weather finally broke, they stepped back out onto soft, track-covered ground and got back to work. It never slowed them down. It gave them the room to prepare for everything waiting on the other side of it. Every tool, every stitch, every story, every painting buried deep underground, all of it traces back to downtime, to the days they couldn't move and had nothing left to do but sit by a fire and think. Boredom, the way we experience it, simply didn't exist for them. When survival depends on what your hands can build in the next few hours, you don't get bored, you get resourceful. And that might be one of the biggest reasons we're still